BiCurean podcast. I'm Aicila.
And I'm Erik.
And we're very excited to welcome you to our pre-episode episode.
Indeed. Been very much looking forward to doing this podcast for a while. And we decided we wanted to start out with more of an introduction as to what our purpose is here and what we're really trying to get to with this podcast.
We intend every week, well, actually every other week to start, because we actually want to meet a schedule, to sort of look at a question to answer, or at least to consider. I don't expect to find a lot of answers. And so for the first one, it is, what is BiCurean?
And I had the same question for you because we've known each other for several months, and I remember it being brought up when we first met. And you've told me several times about the meaning, and I think I've started to embrace it. But I do think it bears some explanation to people to understand what we're doing and what has been a mission of yours for far longer than I've known you.
That's true. Well, and I will say, while you may not necessarily have a mental concept of BiCurean, personally maybe because it's a made-up word, you embody it in terms of the person that you are, which is why I was really excited to do this with you.
That sounds great, and I'll take that as a compliment.
Because you still don't understand what I'm talking about.
Because I think I should appreciate it, but why don't we go through and you can explain to our listeners now and in the future where this all comes from.
And also maybe to you.
I mean, I'm going to pretend like I've understood the whole time.
That sounds fair.
Right.
I think that's a good way to go, especially since you invested a lot of time in helping me do this. It seems like pretending you understand it is a good first step.
I have got your back.
Yeah, no, I know that. I really appreciate it. So for me, the simple sort of definition of BiCurean that I made up with the word that I made up is to embrace the seeming contradictions of life. So, which seems somewhat straightforward and actually is, I've found, not as straightforward as I want to think it is. When I think about it in terms of what inspired me in this direction, I recently visited my dad, and I'm a pretty committed progressive in life, like liberal, blue hat wearing, voting person.
Would you call yourself a social justice warrior?
I have been a social justice warrior in all the ways that can be interpreted. And my dad is a highly committed Republican, religious conservative cowboy. And we're pretty close. And so I was visiting him this last week, and we had this conversation in the car, he and his wife and my partner and I, about politics, which we actually do frequently talk about politics, and so far have not found that to be a wedge between us, which I think, given our highly divergent stances, is a pretty strong testament to our commitment to being family in some ways. And what was interesting to me in that conversation with my dad was, you're looking at me quizzically.
No, I've heard this story, and now we're actually recording it, for the podcast here. But it's interesting because I'm seeing the same aspects of it seem to make your eyes light up every time you've been talking about it.
Yeah, well, it is. Yeah, for me, it's the reason that I want to do this. Like I actually am even worse than a liberal. I'm an idealist, and I actually believe that people are pretty good at heart for the most part, and that what's happening right now in terms of the divisions between us is a focus on that, which is different. When I don't care what your political party is or your affiliation, religious or otherwise, most of us really want the same things. We want satisfying work. We want to be able to take care of our families. We want to be able to pursue some personal interests. And we want to have a belief that when we're old, we'll be able to feed ourselves and not live on the streets. Like, it's pretty basic, and I don't care what else is going on. For the most part, that's what people are looking for. But we focus on all of these other things that actually make us get angry with each other.
Well, and this is something when we first started talking about this concept that came up, just watching how split everything is becoming, and the battle lines that used to be, you know, maybe they were fiercely fought for by each side, but it's hard to imagine they've gotten even more fiercely fought over, and people are pushing further and further to the left or to the right and away from each other, and they're starting to do these blanket things on both sides, which is really disheartening because I've always enjoyed being part of groups that didn't generalize everything, but now everybody's just generalizing everything into, these.
Everybody's generalizing everything.
I mean,
No, it's true, right?
it's awful. Like, just to watch, like,
Mhm.
just like, oh, you're white, so you are racist, or you're a woman, so you're a feminist, and all of these things. And it's like, wow, whether these things are true or not. I mean, it's making the days 15 years ago after September 11th, when everybody was worried that if you had brown skin, you might get singled out at the airport. Wow, that seems like not the worst thing that would be happening these days. So,
No, it's not. And my personal belief, my commitment to this work is that as long as we ascribe to, in a certain way, a social purity, that will continue. So if I'm a liberal, there's a set of things that have to be true about me. And if one of them isn't true, then I'm not a real liberal and I need to be expunged, or, I need to get into the chorus. And then we do the same thing with conservatives. We say, oh, if you're a conservative and if this and this is true, then also that and that. And we just dismiss people. We dismiss their humanity. We judge them as worthy or not worthy beings rather than condemning actions, which is necessary. Like I really am all for condemning actions, and I'm pretty against condemning people. I don't think there are throwaway people.
absolutely. And it's funny because you talk about condemning actions, and a lot of where my motivations in my personal social justice work have come from is to actually make people be accountable for some of the actions that they're doing. What I've watched for the last 10 years really become a thing is I've watched the hardcore left run around and tell people, you have to be tolerant. You have to do this. You have to accept this. You have to. To these staunch right-wing people being told what to do. And then their reaction was finally, I'm not going to take this anymore. I'm dug in now. Like I'm backed into the corner.
Mhm.
And I think the biggest thing that the left and socialist movements have done wrong is make this into it. You have to call me he, she, it. You have to do this stuff. And it's like, what if we asked? What if we said, could you call me this? I would appreciate that. We've made, I am a left winger. I fully admit that, but we have made our mistakes in how things are presented. I've done it myself, but then I've seen other people do it. And so realistically, I think we need to start looking at things from more of a balance of how would you like it if somebody came up and told you what you have to do?
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and just to acknowledge that the story is more complex, which for me goes back to, this conversation I'm having with my dad about politics. And for example, I'm talking to him and he's a very committed conservationist. He invests in wind power. His home is built on solar radiant heating. Like he's got composting and all these things. Like he has a pretty close to zero impact home that he spent a lot of time
Because he's a
creating.
card-carrying liberal Greenpeace member, right?
Because he's a Republican conservative, right? However, and it's funny because he hates environmentalists. Oh, the environmentalists are doing this, they're doing that. And he calls it, he hates the nanny state. He's always on about that. And I was talking to him on this trip and I said, there's something I think you should consider, Dad, which is that there's a lot of things you know that you don't know that you know. He was raised on a ranch. And when And it was his family's ranch. He doesn't live there anymore. They lost it when he was a kid. And if they didn't manage the water, if they didn't engage in conservationism, then they had no water. If they overgrazed the land, their cows couldn't eat, and they would lose either their income or their food. So for him, it's common sense. It's common sense to conserve. You don't run the water when you're brushing your teeth because that's your well, and it's how you're going to run your crops and all this. And I was telling him, I said, you just don't know what you know, Dad. For you, that's common sense because your survival depended on it. For those of us who are raised in the suburbs in the city, someone has to teach us because we turn on a faucet and water comes out. And there's very little that I can do to impact whether or not that's going to happen other than not pay my bill. So I think money gets me water. I don't necessarily understand these other things.
No, and it makes total sense. And it's funny because I think that's the other thing about BiCurean that I was really drawn into it with is just the idea of when you really dig into something, you're going to see some depth to it.
Yeah.
It's not just a race thing. It's not just a conservation thing. Why do people want to do these things? Where is their motivation?
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, and this goes for both sides, this is where I really stand in the middle. It goes for both sides. Ignorance is no longer an excuse. And lack of understanding and empathy for people's beliefs is no longer an excuse.
Yeah. Well, and so when I was in high school, I was very blessed to receive an opportunity to live in Germany for a year. And I lived with a host family, a German host family. And I remember getting really angry with my host father because he would talk about how he was responsible for what happened to the Jewish people under Hitler. And I'm like, I think you were 7 at the time. Like, how are you responsible? And I really didn't understand what he was talking about in terms of collective accountability. And I feel like I do now, in that what he was attempting to communicate was that as a German who was not Jewish, he benefited from what was done to the Jewish people. The money that was given to German families and the ways in which the Jewish German families were persecuted. He, as a citizen, ended up having a benefit as well as a non-benefit as part of the country. And taking on accountability for it is a way to say, we want to do things differently. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. So when people talk about things like being accountable for slavery, that's what they're talking about. But it's very complicated and it's confusing because it's like, wait a minute, that's not me. It feels very upsetting. And yet at the same time, when I think about what my host father was talking about, and I was angry with him, I was like, why would you take that on? I was so mad because I had such a passion for fairness and it seemed so unfair to me. And I appreciated his patience with me because I feel like over time, that commitment that he had to like that collective accountability helped me to understand a larger kind of fairness. And that's also part of it for me is saying, my dad doesn't know what he knows about conservation. So he thinks the nanny state's a waste of time. But those of us who aren't experienced with what he has, we actually need the regulations because otherwise we're going to hurt our own survival in complete ignorance because we don't understand it.
It's absolutely true. I think it's kind of funny because I feel like right now what America could use a dose of is that kind of accountability that he felt as a German citizen.
Yeah.
I mean, we've done some bad things and we've done plenty of good things. I don't think we're a bad country. I'm not anti-America by any means.
Okay.
But I think realistically, it's such an interesting concept. What if we were accountable to ourselves and to our own national pride instead of it being about who's kneeling or standing during the national anthem and what their messages are and they're being un-American like that? What if we actually had accountability to say, man, why do people feel that way?
Yeah, no,
Why?
that's a great question.
And that's what he's doing. I mean, your foster home father there was basically taking accountability for something that was nothing more than just him being a German.
Yeah. and saying he wanted to be responsible for what that meant and carry that forward in a way that didn't perpetuate the things that caused that atrocity. And so for me, and I love the way you just said that, part of the BiCurean process is to say, if this is happening, what's going on here?
Right.
How is this occurring for this person? And how do we view it from a perspective that embraces things that look like contradictions, right? Like, it looks contradictory that my dad is anti-environmentalist and pro-conservation. And yet, in terms of talking to him, it's really clear that it's a natural thing for him.
Yeah. It's really funny. I feel like this isn't actually news. I've heard this for years, that, ranchers and farmers are always the left-wing environmentalist best friends. They're the ones in the trenches. They can give some of the most feedback on what has happened environmentally that has caused a lot of their problems. And it's really funny because those are usually also the people that are voting for the other side.
And
but they are they always call them the stewards of the land. They are.
Because they have to be. It's very personal for them. Are my kids going to eat personal? For me, it might be an ideology or a distant fear that there won't be water. For them, it's next season, if I don't do this properly, what will happen to my family?
Yeah.
It's a really different question. And acknowledging that, one of the things that I think we've done poorly in terms of, our mutual leftiness in the left is we dismiss people. Well, they're not educated the way that we are, and they're anti-nanny state, as my dad calls it.
Yep.
And he was saying, no one asked. They did something, I can't remember what it was. It was a monument or something in Utah. And he said, no one interviewed anybody in this area to find out. And he was I really appreciate the way in which he talked about it in terms of saying, like, I think it was called the Bear Ears Monument. He said, they do need to be protected. They're fragile. I'm totally supportive of that, which I was like, really? But because he always talks about environmentalist protections so negatively, I was kind of stunned. I'm like, wow, you're okay, cool. He said, and they protected so much around it. He said it was ridiculous. So he's completely anti the protection because he felt like they were ridiculous in terms of how much they took out.
Right.
And his point was, no one wants to talk to us.
Yeah.
Right. And so we, as liberals, need to learn to reach out to people that we think are going to be maybe cranky or disagree and actually find out what's going on for them.
I agree. So I think we've actually managed to touch on a lot of what we're going to be doing here with the BiCurean.
Yep.
And the podcast. And of course, you have your writing and your blog. I'm not personally involved in that, but I always love reading it. But
well, and you are welcome to write things if you would like.
I may just do that at some point. But as far as the podcast goes, I think this is a good intro for the kind of discussions we're going to have. It's really because these are the sorts of things we've been sitting around talking about amongst ourselves. We might as well do it in a public forum so other people can maybe at least think about our perspective and the perspectives we're trying to bring.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm excited because I feel like there's a lot to explore, and hopefully people who are listening will give us their ideas too.
Absolutely. So, as always, whenever we post this up, it's going to be on multiple forums. We welcome feedback, and we want to hear what you think. We want to read comments, good and bad. Tell us where we're wrong. Get us to think. We're not by any means trying to sit here and preach our beliefs on things. In fact, what we're trying to do is just objectively throw out some ideas and see things from both sides.
Yeah. Agreed. Seconded.
So on our first podcast, we actually are going to start our new section of Thought of the Day. And this is something that Aicila and I have each been thinking about recently today, and we're just going to put it down for the record. Mine is a more serious subject. Something I had heard recently was about Amazon, Berkshire Hathaway, and JP Morgan Chase are all getting together to form their own, basically, health insurance company with the express purpose of offering all three companies better and lower cost health insurance.
I want that health insurance.
I think this is a fantastic idea. Whereas I don't necessarily agree with further privatization of the health insurance industry from a political standpoint. I figure if this is the world we live in, it's actually nice to see some altruistic behavior happening
Yeah.
from big companies that have no incentive to do that other than to help out their own employees.
They have some incentive in that the costs are going so high right now. It will probably reduce, if they can do it correctly, they'll be able to reduce their overhead.
This is true, but with so many eyes on them after this announcement and doing that, I mean, they're almost going to be bound to make this a very good deal for those employees and something that's going to be enviable. It's not going to be a good look for any of those three companies if their employees are worse off from the formation of this company than they were before. So I'm very interested to see how this plays out in the future here.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for telling me about it. I hadn't heard about it.
And what is your thought of the day?
Mine is really important. I can't wait to see Black Panther. I'm so excited that they finally made a superhero movie. A super movie. We got Wonder Woman last year, and now this year we're getting Black Panther. Around a different culture with a cast of people of color with some, I haven't seen it, so I don't know. And people are going nutso. Like the number of folks and groups that are doing like fundraisers around Black culture events. I'm just really excited.
I think it's going to be fantastic. I think the character of Black Panther is going to be compelling enough. As a comic book fan, I'd be the first to admit that some of the stories that maybe should be made might not have as wide of appeal. But the fact of the matter is Black Panther, we got him introduced in an earlier movie in Civil War, so he's not a brand new character. We're sort of set up.
They've been really smart about that.
They've done everything right with it so far, so I hope they do good in the movie, and I think it's going to be fantastic. And I love that they're doing it in such a way. Like, I haven't seen a whole lot of things that are making it about being a Black superhero, which makes me feel good about it kind of just deeper down because it's just going to be a good superhero movie.
Right, which is what we need.
And he's Black. And that's just a fact about it, rather than they're doing this because there was an outcry for a Black superhero or anything like it. I think it's just positive.
It's really positive. Well, it's been a long time coming. So there's definitely been, I've gone to a few Comic-Con
Let me
panels.
rephrase. They should have done something like this years ago. But
Yes.
then again, we've been in this culture where...
we got a green superhero before we got a Black one. I don't know. There's the thing.
Right.
However, I'm just excited because it really seems like, and I loved his character in Civil War. Like, he was powerful and graceful and not Western and yet still able to like move in that society. So
he was accessible. That's a big deal too.
I'm excited to see what they do with it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be fantastic. So
it's not like health insurance, and yet I'll have to be honest, it's probably one of the big highlights for me this month.
So is just a heads up, we're often going to cover everything from completely meaningless minutia of pop culture and our geeky things that we're into, as well as some really harder, deeper subjects that are probably going to be a little more triggering for everyone. But that's pretty much our day-to-day life, so you all get to be a part of it.
Mm-hmm. And we really do encourage you to share your thoughts with us. We're trying this out. We don't know what's going to happen. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We have a website, BiCurean.com. Find us, talk to us.
And of course, we want to see your comments so that we can know just how much you agree or disagree with us.
Mm-hmm. Either one. And suggest topics.
Yes, we're always looking for topic ideas. There's plenty we can scan the newspapers for and find, but anything that anyone wants to have us bring up, we're more than happy. We love doing the research on this and digging in and understanding a little bit more than what you get in your, 2 paragraphs of a CNN article or something like that. All right, so we'll see you in 2 weeks when we're going to talk about
The Philandering Feminist.
The Philandering Feminist. So this is based on a news article from August, you said?
Yeah.
Okay.
Joss Whedon, God of Geekery. Is he a feminist?
And serial cheater.
And serial cheater. So sad.
So sad. All right. Well, looking forward to it. We'll talk to you all soon.
See you later.